You're going to see these metaphysical assumptions. And then you're going to see a contrast with that with orthodoxy. But what you see and what we've talked thus far, especially with in antiquity and the ancient Greeks, are the metaphysical assumptions that oneness is perfection, and that multiplicity, oneness, and immutability are perfection. And that multiplicity and dunamis, change or the ability to change or something like that, potency, is imperfection. And that's why you get with Aristotle, God is the highest reality. So in his metaphysics, he considers that, and Aquinas is going to pick up on this as well. So he's just picking up on all Aristotle's arguments for the existence of God. That, well, look, what explains change, right? The pre-Socratics are always wondering about that. Mm-hmm. Well, there has to be something actually hot or moving or in a particular state to make what's not in that state change.
Right.
So if you describe change is the water going from cold to hot, then how does that happen? Well, you have to have something actually hot making what's cold change into what's hot. And so eventually you're going to have to get back to something that explains it all, that's not being changed, but is the explanation for all change.
Yes.
So it's going to be changeless, and it won't have parts, because then it's going to have, well, how do the parts work? You're going to have to go back to a further principle. So it ends up being one, changeless, and it's going to be what Aristotle calls pure actuality, but it's thought. And it thinks about it's the highest things, which is itself. So it's divine, but it's static. So it's not doing anything, right? Because it can't change. Mm-hmm. It's simply knowing itself in eternity forever. And that's ultimately the explanation behind everything.
Yeah.
So that's Aristotle's God. It's not personal. But notice those assumptions. One is perfection. And they'll try to reduce everything to the one and reduce all multiplicity to the one and all change to the changeless. And even within the ancient cosmology of spheres, you have the same thing. So at the terrestrial level, this is the lowest reality, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's imperfect. And so everything's changing. But if you go up into the first heaven, right, I guess that would be the ether or something like that. You get out of the atmosphere. Well, things are changing, but not as fast as things here. And then the second heaven and the third heaven, where you have the different planets, right, spheres. And what you notice is they'll say the fixed stars, right, on the back. Like, so you have when they say movable stars, they're really referring to the planets, right, that are going around. But behind them is the fixed stars, right? So as you go up, the spheres in this geocentric, concentric kind of universe, mm-hmm. It's supposed to get more and more perfect, right? And ultimately, out of the seventh heaven would be the one. Absolutely, like, doesn't change at all. And unlike the fixed stars where there is no multiplicity, it's just one. And that's what explains the motion of all the spheres and different stuff like that. And as you brought out too, that even ties into the notion of time, because for the ancients, time is cyclical, it's eternal. Right. So for Aristotle, there was no creator. There is the cause, which is God, which is not a person, but is self-thinking thought and pure actuality. And it's the cause of all motion, but it doesn't move. It's the cause of all things. But those spheres, the material universe has always been there. And it's just So time is just cyclical. It's the eternal return. And we'll see that orthodoxy breaks from that in two important ways. A denial of the classical Greek metaphysics and antiquity, that one is perfection and immutability is perfection. So in God, there's dunamis.
Right.
In God, there's multiplicity. And this problem going back to the one and the many, in which the one is always put first as an explanation and the many are always reduced, orthodoxy breaks that dialectics of opposition there by saying they work together.
Right.
The one is not, in Orthodox theology, is not above the Trinity. And in fact, if anything, it's reversed. The way that we start is not with, and are kind of like if there was an Orthodox metaphysics, with one ends up being the explanation, because then, like the scholastics and the Greeks, we would actually put essence first. We explain God first by essence, and then you tack on persons.
Mm-hmm.
But in Orthodoxy, we start with, how do we know what God is? God's one, right? One God. But in three persons, how do we know the one what? Through the three who's. So it's person that comes before. It's Trinity that actually explains the whole universe.
Right.
So it's the triad that's in everything and explains everything. That's actually our metaphysics. So it's actually reversed from the Greek metaphysics, is that it's not one that explains everything. It's triad that explains everything.
Right.
Man is made in the entire cosmos in triad.
Which highlights that orthodoxy is beginning with particularity and moving towards the multiple to the unifying, or the essence of God. We know the essence of God through the three persons of God. And I always bring this up. I think it's so interesting that Pythagoras talked about how 3 is the first number of multiplicity. And of course, our God is 3 persons, so it's one essence and it's multiplicity. It's in the Godhead, it's one and the many. That orthodoxy is saying that no, this tension, this eternal tension that the Greek mind, Plato, that the realm of the forms is ideal, and all this multiplicity is sort of illusionary. This is a misunderstanding. This is sort of haphazard. That no, they go together. This is sort of a symphony. They go together, and we actually know the unity through the multiplicity. It's not a diminution. It's a both and.
I'm trying to remember. What do we got here? It might be in this book here that I mentioned in St. Basil. By the way, this is Losky's The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, where there's a really good quote from St. Basil discussing the triad. So, and I'm only bringing this up because it's going to hit exactly on what you actually said. The ability to resolve the dialectical tension of the one and the many that's in the Greek. So if everything was one, we couldn't understand.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, because there's no distinction then.
There's no distinction. But if everything was explained in terms of dyad too, then
there's no completion.
There's no, and there would be no knowledge either, because you'd actually, so dyad, two-ness is difference. That would be like, this is different than that. But remember what I need for knowledge. I need both of them. I need to see how are all those trees both one and different.
Yeah.
So if it's all reduced to monad, I can't actually understand anything.
Right.
I can't understand difference. If everything's reduced to dyad, then I can't understand unity. So it's the triad that completes that.
Yes.